2 championship reigns, 280 days as WWF champion, multiple WrestleMania main events. On paper, Yokozuna had one of the most successful careers in wrestling history. But beneath all that success was a man dealing with serious weight and health issues that the wrestling business only made worse. Rodney went from being part of wrestling's most famous family to playing a character that required him to gain massive amounts of weight. The result was both incredible success and ultimate tragedy. Today we're telling his complete story. Born into wrestling royalty, Rodney was never supposed to be Japanese at all. This San Francisco native came into the world in 1966 with a family tree that reads like a who's who of Samoan wrestling legends. We're talking about the Rock's family here, folks. His uncles were Afa and Sika, better known as the Wild Samoans. His cousins included future stars like The Rock and Roman Reigns. This wasn't just some random big guy who wandered into wrestling. This was a kid who grew up around the business. Rodney started training with his uncle Afa when he was still a teenager. Afa didn't go easy on him just because they were family. The training was brutal, old-school style. We're talking about hours of conditioning, learning how to take bumps properly, and understanding ring psychology. Afa taught him that being big wasn't enough. You had to move like an athlete and think like a performer. Rodney soaked it all up, and by 1985, he was ready to make his professional debut. But the wrestling business had other plans for this Samoan giant, plans that would completely erase his real identity. See, when you're 500 pounds and athletic, promoters start seeing dollar signs. But they also start seeing gimmicks. Rodney began working as Coquina Maximus, traveling through smaller promotions in Mexico, New Japan, and AWA through the late 1980s and early 1990s. He was learning his craft the hard way, working in front of crowds that didn't speak English and promoters who paid in cash if you were lucky. During his time in Japan, something interesting happened. Rodney actually studied sumo wrestling techniques. He wasn't just playing a character, he was learning legitimate sumo moves and incorporating them into his wrestling style. The Japanese crowds ate it up. Here was this massive Samoan guy who understood and respected their traditional sport. But back then, he was still Coquina, still proud of his Samoan heritage. His natural athleticism, despite his size, caught the attention of WWE scouts. Keep in mind, this was the early 1990s. Vince McMahon was looking for larger-than-life characters who could work in the ring. Most 500-pound guys were slow and limited in what they could do. But Rodney could move. He could do drop kicks. He could climb the ropes. He was essentially a super heavyweight who wrestled like a cruiserweight. When WWE offered him a contract in 1992, there was one major catch. They didn't want Coquina Maximus the Samoan, they wanted a Japanese character. WWE created the Yokozuna sumo gimmick and paired him with Mr. Fuji to present a foreign sumo champion. They gave him traditional Japanese entrance music, a Japanese flag, and incorporated real sumo elements like the salt-throwing ritual before matches. Everything about the character was designed to make American audiences believe they were watching an authentic Japanese sumo champion who had invaded their wrestling. But here's the thing, Rodney faced a difficult career decision. He could stay true to his Samoan roots and probably wrestle in smaller promotions for the rest of his life. Or he could accept this new identity and become a main event star in the biggest wrestling company in the world. He chose his career. The transformation was complete when he walked through those curtains for the first time as Yokozuna. The announcers sold him as a legitimate sumo champion from Japan. Mr. Fuji spoke for him in broken English and Japanese phrases. Even wrestling magazines played along with the story. Fans had no idea that this Japanese monster was actually a third-generation Samoan wrestler from San Francisco. Yokozuna made his television debut on October 31st, 1992 on WWE Superstars, then his pay-per-view debut at Survivor Series on November 25th, 1992. The character worked so well that fans completely bought into the illusion, making Yokozuna an instant monster heel. Within months of his debut, he was destroying established stars and climbing the card toward championship matches. The WWE had created the perfect foreign menace for the 1990s, but this identity swap would make him a star while also creating problems that would follow him for the rest of his career. Now came the real test. proving that all this hype could translate into actual in-ring performance. Yokozuna's ring work immediately separated him from every other super heavyweight in wrestling. When he debuted in late 1992, WWE had a problem. How do you make a 500-pound man look athletic? Most wrestlers that size moved like walking refrigerators. They plodded around the ring, threw slow punches, and relied on their size to intimidate opponents. But WWE needed something different. They needed a monster who could actually wrestle, not just stand there and look big. The answer came in the form of this Samoan giant who moved far better than most super heavyweights. His television debut happened on an episode of Superstars in October 1992. They started him off against jobbers, which made sense. You don't throw a new character against main event talent right away. But even in these squash matches, something was different. Yokozuna wasn't just standing there and overpowering guys. He was hitting dropkicks. He was showing footwork. He was moving around that ring like he weighed 250 pounds instead of 500. The announcers were selling it hard, but they didn't have to oversell it. The guy was legitimately athletic. Some questioned whether a man that size could work longer matches, and that skepticism would shape how he was booked. What happens when he gets in there with guys who can actually wrestle back? What happens when the matches go longer than 3 minutes? Can he keep up that pace? Can he tell a story in the ring? These were all fair questions because history was full of big men who looked great in short matches but fell apart when they had to work longer programs. Here's what shocked audiences who expected a slow, plodding giant. Yokozuna could work at a pace that most heavyweights couldn't match. His conditioning was actually pretty good for a guy his size. He understood ring psychology better than wrestlers who had been in the business for years. When he hit that dropkick, it wasn't just a spot to show off. It fit into the flow of the match. When he used his size advantage, it made sense within the story they were telling. This wasn't just a big guy doing big guy things. This was a wrestler who happened to be massive. His signature moves told the whole story of what made him special. The leg drop was devastating because of the impact, but it also showed his agility getting up to the second rope. The Samoan drop demonstrated both power and technique. But the move that ended matches instantly was the banzai drop. This wasn't just Yokozuna falling on guys. He would climb to the second rope, measure his opponent, and come down with all 500 pounds concentrated on their chest. The sound it made when he connected was sickening. Wrestlers would sell it like they'd been hit by a truck because that's basically what happened. The salt ritual added mystique and made every entrance feel special. But more than that, it gave him character depth. This wasn't just a big guy who walked to the ring and started wrestling. This was a character with traditions and rituals that fans could connect with, even if they were supposed to hate him. Survivor Series 1992 was where things really clicked into place. His match against Virgil wasn't just a squash, it was a statement. Virgil was a guy who could work, someone fans knew could have competitive matches with top stars. When Yokozuna demolished him in under 5 minutes, it sent a message to the entire roster. This new guy wasn't just another monster of the month. He was the real deal. The way he tossed Virgil around that ring, then finished him with the banzai drop, showed everyone watching that the WWE had something special on their hands. Within months, this supposed rookie was being positioned for championship contention, proving size and skill could coexist. They were moving him up the card faster than almost any wrestler in company history. By early 1993, he was already in programs with established main event talent. The WWE wasn't treating him like a novelty act or a transitional character. They were booking him like their next big star. But nobody could have predicted what would happen at the next major pay-per-view event. Yokozuna entered the 1993 Royal Rumble at number 27 and eliminated Randy Savage, establishing him as an immediate main event threat. What happened that night in Sacramento created a record that still stands today. He became the first wrestler ever to win the Royal Rumble from the number 27 position. Entry number 27 was considered a major disadvantage because you're coming in so late with most of the ring already full of tired but dangerous competitors. The Royal Rumble concept is simple: 30 wrestlers enter at timed intervals. You get eliminated by going over the top rope with both feet hitting the floor, and the last man standing gets a WrestleMania title shot. Most experts predicted established stars like Randy Savage or The Undertaker would win, not the newcomer who'd only been on television for a few months. When Yokozuna's music hit and he entered at number 27, the crowd didn't really know what to expect. He came to the ring with Mr. Fuji, did his salt ceremony, and stepped through the ropes. The ring was packed with talent, but something interesting happened almost immediately. Yokozuna started eliminating guys left and right. We're talking about rapid-fire eliminations that caught everyone off guard. He tossed out Virgil like he was nothing. Tatanka went flying. Even established mid-card wrestlers couldn't do anything against his size and power. His elimination technique was different from what you usually see in Royal Rumbles. Most wrestlers try to wear their opponents down first, maybe work on their legs or back, then try to get them over the rope. Yokozuna just grabbed guys and threw them out. No setup needed, no extended struggle at the ropes. He was treating grown men like they were children, just picking them up and depositing them on the floor. The crowd was getting louder with each elimination because they were seeing something they'd never seen before. The key moment came when he eliminated Randy Savage. Savage was the champion, the guy everyone expected to win or at least make it to the Final Four. When Yokozuna grabbed him and tossed him out without much trouble, that's when you could feel the energy in the building change. Fans started realizing this monster might actually win the whole thing. The announcers were selling it hard, talking about how nobody could match his size and strength. By the time it got down to the final few wrestlers, Yokozuna was clearly in control. He eliminated Carlos Colon, then Tito Santana. When it came down to him and Randy Savage's tag team partner, the outcome wasn't really in doubt. Yokozuna had been the most dominant wrestler in the match from the moment he entered. His victory was decisive and clear. No controversy, no lucky breaks. He just overpowered everyone and won. This single victory transformed Yokozuna from monster heel to legitimate main event player overnight. Winning the Royal Rumble meant he was getting a title shot at WrestleMania 9 against Bret Hart. That's the biggest stage in wrestling, but more than that, his dominant performance showed that WWE was completely behind him as their next major villain. They weren't treating him like a novelty act anymore. He was the guy they wanted carrying the company as champion. The stage was set for a classic good versus evil showdown at WrestleMania 9. Bret Hart, the technical wrestling hero from Canada, against Yokozuna, the massive foreign monster who had bulldozed through the competition. On paper, it looked like the perfect main event to crown a new champion. But what actually happened in that championship match would create one of wrestling's most controversial moments and leave fans arguing about it for decades. WrestleMania 9 at Caesars Palace on April 4, 1993, featured one of the most controversial endings in the event's history, and it happened in just 22 seconds. You had Bret Hart, the technical wrestling master and fan favorite, defending his WWE Championship against Yokozuna, the unstoppable monster heel. This was classic good versus evil booking. Hart represented everything fans loved about wrestling: skill, heart, and determination. Yokozuna was the foreign threat, the massive villain who crushed opponents with raw power. The build-up to this match was perfect. Hart had been champion since the previous October and was having great matches with everyone they put in front of him. Meanwhile, Yokozuna had been destroying wrestlers for months, culminating with that dominant Royal Rumble victory. The story wrote itself. Could Hart's technical skills overcome Yokozuna's size advantage? Could the champion find a way to get this 500-pound monster off his feet? Fans were genuinely invested in seeing if their hero could overcome what seemed like impossible odds. The match itself was actually pretty good for what it was. Hart came out with a game plan. He wasn't trying to overpower Yokozuna because that would be stupid. Instead, he focused on using his speed and technical skills to stay out of trouble. He worked Yokozuna's legs, trying to chop the big man down. He used hit-and-run tactics, getting in quick shots, then backing away before Yokozuna could grab him. For most of the match, Hart was actually controlling the action. He had Yokozuna down on the mat several times. He was working that leg, trying to set up for the sharpshooter. The crowd was getting behind Hart because it looked like he might actually pull this off. You could feel the energy building as fans thought they were about to see their champion overcome the monster through pure wrestling skill. Hart was doing everything right, and it was working. Then everything changed in the worst possible way. Mr. Fuji, who had been relatively quiet at ringside, suddenly got involved. He climbed up on the apron while Hart had Yokozuna in trouble. The referee went over to deal with Fuji, which meant he wasn't watching the action in the ring. That's when Fuji threw a handful of salt right into Hart's eyes. The champion was instantly blinded, stumbling around the ring trying to clear his vision. Yokozuna saw his opportunity and grabbed the blinded Hart. He scooped him up and dropped him with a belly-to-belly suplex. Then he climbed to the second rope for the banzai drop. Hart couldn't see it coming, couldn't move out of the way, couldn't do anything to defend himself. When all 500 pounds came crashing down, it was over. The referee counted to 3, and Yokozuna was the new WWE Champion. The celebration lasted about 20 seconds. Yokozuna was jumping around the ring, Mr. Fuji was celebrating, and the crowd was booing loudly. Then Hulk Hogan's music hit. Hogan came down to the ring to supposedly check on his friend Bret Hart. He helped Hart to the back, which seemed like a nice gesture from a veteran to a fellow wrestler. But then Hogan came back to the ring, and things got weird fast. Mr. Fuji got on the microphone and challenged Hogan to an impromptu match right there. Hogan initially refused, playing up the whole reluctant hero thing. But then Hart, still selling the salt in his eyes, encouraged Hogan to take the match. So Hogan agreed, and they had an instant championship match at WrestleMania with no advance notice or promotion. The match lasted less than a minute. Fuji tried the salt trick again, but this time it backfired. The salt hit Yokozuna instead of Hogan. One leg drop later, and Hogan was the new champion. Yokozuna had held the WWE Championship for exactly 22 seconds before losing it to a guy who wasn't even scheduled to wrestle that night. Plans changed at the last minute. Hogan walked out as champion, a decision that many wrestlers and fans still debate. This booking decision would anger fans for decades because it undermined Hart's title reign and made Yokozuna's first championship feel meaningless. Hart lost his title due to cheating, which made him look weak. Yokozuna won and lost the championship so quickly that his victory felt like a footnote rather than a crowning achievement. But Yokozuna would get his chance at redemption soon enough. The summer of 1993 was about to turn him into something much bigger than just another wrestling champion. WWE decided to create that challenger through the most American way possible, a patriotic spectacle that would get massive media attention. They booked the USS Intrepid, a World War II aircraft carrier turned museum in New York Harbor, for what they called Yokozuna's Body Slam Challenge on July 4, 1993. The setup was simple but brilliant. Yokozuna would stand in the middle of the ship's deck, and any athlete from any sport could try to body slam him. If they succeeded, they'd win prize money. If they failed, well, they'd probably get embarrassed on national television. WWE positioned this as impossible due to Yokozuna's massive size. At over 500 pounds, he was bigger than most NFL linemen. The company was so confident that nobody could slam him that they offered serious cash prizes to anyone who could pull it off. They invited athletes from all over. NFL players showed up. Olympic weightlifters came out. Bodybuilders, powerlifters, and strongmen all took their shots. One by one, they failed. Some couldn't even get Yokozuna off his feet. Others managed to lift him slightly but couldn't complete the slam. Yokozuna would just stand there, arms crossed, barely moving while these world-class athletes struggled with his dead weight. Each failure made him look more unstoppable and more arrogant. The spectacle tapped into early 90s American versus foreign heel storytelling. Athletes failed to slam him on the deck of the Intrepid until Luger arrived by helicopter, creating perfect theater that explained why it mattered for TV and PR. Yokozuna became a symbolic foreign menace. This wasn't just about wrestling anymore. They were making it about national pride. Here was this supposed Japanese champion showing up America's best athletes on one of the country's most famous military vessels. When Lex Luger arrived via helicopter and successfully slammed the champion, everything changed. Luger wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't advertised, wasn't announced, and most fans had no idea he was coming. The helicopter landing on the Intrepid was pure theater, but it worked perfectly. Here was this all-American hero, literally dropping out of the sky to answer the challenge when no other American athlete could get the job done. Luger's slam of Yokozuna was the moment WWE had been building toward all day. The crowd exploded. Yokozuna looked shocked. Mr. Fuji was beside himself. In one moment, Luger had done what nobody else could do, proved that this foreign monster wasn't unstoppable after all. The visual of Luger holding his arms up in victory on the deck of an aircraft carrier with the New York skyline behind him was perfect American hero imagery. The intrepid moment turned Luger into a mainstream babyface and set up their SummerSlam program for August 30th, 1993. Luger had been working as a heel before this, but the body slam challenge instantly turned him face. Suddenly, he was the guy who could stand up to Yokozuna when nobody else could. The media coverage was massive. ESPN covered it, newspapers ran photos, wrestling magazines put it on their covers. Both wrestlers got elevated to new heights because of one body slam. The patriotic fervor surrounding their eventual SummerSlam showdown was unlike anything wrestling had seen in years. WWE turned their match into America versus Japan. Luger's entrance at SummerSlam featured red, white, and blue pyrotechnics. Yokozuna came out with Japanese flags and traditional music. The crowd was whipped into a frenzy before the match even started. Signs everywhere said things like "Slam Yoko" and "USA Rules." This felt bigger than just a wrestling match. Their SummerSlam match had the controversial countout finish that protected both men. Luger knocked out Yokozuna with a loaded forearm, but couldn't get him back in the ring before the 10 count. So Luger won the match, but Yokozuna kept the title because championships don't change hands on countouts. It was frustrating for fans, but smart booking because it kept the feud going. The body slam challenge had backfired by creating his biggest rival, but it also cemented Yokozuna's role as wrestling's ultimate villain. He had never been more hated or more important to the company's success. But before he could truly establish himself as a dominant champion, there was unfinished business to handle. King of the Ring on June 13, 1993, gave Yokozuna the chance to prove that his WrestleMania victory wasn't a fluke. He had won the championship from Bret Hart, then lost it immediately to Hulk Hogan in that controversial impromptu match. Now he was getting a proper one-on-one rematch with Hogan for the WWE Championship. This time, there wouldn't be any surprise appearances or last-minute booking changes. Just champion versus challenger in a straight-up title match. The setup felt different from their WrestleMania encounter. Hogan was the defending champion coming into this match, which meant he had something to lose. At WrestleMania, he was just making a surprise appearance to help his friend Bret Hart. Here at King of the Ring, he was the target. Yokozuna was the hunter, and everyone knew he wanted payback for what happened 3 months earlier. The storyline was simple but effective, the monster heel getting his shot at redemption. WWE added an interesting wrinkle to the rematch by bringing in photographer Harvey Whippleman, whose camera flashes could potentially blind Yokozuna. This was their way of acknowledging what happened at WrestleMania, without directly saying that Mr. Fuji's salt throw was the reason Yokozuna won the first time. They were setting up the possibility that Hogan might use similar tactics. Those camera flashes could be just as blinding as throwing salt. The psychology was there. If Yokozuna couldn't see, he couldn't use his size advantage effectively. The match played out completely differently from their WrestleMania encounter, with Yokozuna dominating the aging Hogan from the opening bell. This wasn't a quick squash match where interference decided the outcome in under a minute. Yokozuna was in control for most of the contest, using his size and strength to wear down the champion. Hogan tried his usual comeback spots, but they weren't working against someone this big. His punches barely moved Yokozuna. His attempt at a body slam failed completely. The old Hulkster magic wasn't happening. You could see that Hogan was struggling with Yokozuna's size in ways he hadn't dealt with before. Most of Hogan's opponents over the years were guys he could eventually overpower or outmuscle when it came time for his comeback. But Yokozuna was just too big and too strong. When Hogan tried to whip him into the ropes, Yokozuna reversed it and sent Hogan flying instead. When Hogan went for his big boot finisher, Yokozuna caught his leg and dumped him on his back. Nothing was working for the champion. The turning point came when Mr. Fuji turned the tables, using the camera flash against Hogan instead of helping his own wrestler get blinded. Whippleman was positioned at ringside with his camera, waiting for the right moment to blind Yokozuna and help Hogan retain his title. But Fuji was smarter this time. He grabbed the camera away from Whippleman and used the flash to blind Hogan instead. The champion was stumbling around the ring, unable to see, while Yokozuna positioned himself for the finish. Yokozuna's decisive victory felt completely earned this time around. He scooped up the blinded Hogan and dropped him with a Samoan drop. Then he climbed to the second rope for the banzai drop that had finished so many wrestlers over the past year. When 500 pounds came crashing down on Hogan's chest, there was no kicking out. The referee counted to 3 and Yokozuna was champion again. But more importantly, he had beaten Hogan decisively in a match that lasted over 10 minutes. His emotional celebration as champion once again showed how much this victory meant to him personally. Yokozuna was jumping around the ring, hugging Mr. Fuji and holding the championship belt over his head. This wasn't just another title win, this was redemption for what happened at WrestleMania. Yokozuna beat Hogan cleanly at King of the Ring, a decisive win that erased the 22-second WrestleMania fluke in the eyes of many fans. This victory began what would become a record-setting 280-day championship reign that would define the next era of WWE programming. Yokozuna had proven he could beat the most famous wrestler in the world in a real match, not just a surprise encounter. Now he had to prove he could stay on top. But his reign would soon be tested by an opponent unlike any other he had faced. The Undertaker represented something Yokozuna had never faced before, a wrestler who seemed completely immune to intimidation. While wrestlers like Lex Luger and Bret Hart represented everything good about America and technical wrestling, The Undertaker was something completely different. He didn't care about patriotism or proving American strength. He didn't rely on technical skills or high-flying moves. The Undertaker was death itself, walking to that ring with one goal, putting his opponents to rest permanently. What made this feud special was that The Undertaker was the one wrestler who didn't fear Yokozuna's size or strength. Every other wrestler on the roster had to develop special strategies to deal with a 500-pound monster. They'd work his legs, use their speed, or rely on interference to level the playing field. But Undertaker just walked straight at Yokozuna like his size meant nothing. He'd absorb punishment that would drop other wrestlers, then sit up like nothing happened. This drove Yokozuna crazy because his greatest weapon, intimidation through sheer size, didn't work at all. Their encounters would produce some of the most bizarre and controversial matches in wrestling history. You had two completely different character types colliding in ways that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Yokozuna was grounded in reality. Yeah, he was supposed to be Japanese when he wasn't, but his character made sense within wrestling logic. He was big, he was strong, and he used traditional wrestling moves. The Undertaker was pure supernatural nonsense, a dead man who could control lightning and feel no pain. Their steel cage encounters showed how Undertaker's supernatural gimmick clashed with Yokozuna's monster heel persona in the most interesting ways. In a normal cage match, you win by escaping over the top or through the door. Simple concept that makes perfect sense. But when The Undertaker was involved, the match required heavy outside interference and theatrical elements to finish, which made for a memorable but controversial moment. You can't make a dead man look vulnerable without breaking the whole gimmick, but somehow they made it work. Fans bought into both characters even when they were in the same match together. The infamous Royal Rumble 1994 casket match was where things got completely insane. This wasn't just Yokozuna versus The Undertaker anymore. This was Yokozuna plus half the heel roster trying to put one man in a wooden box. The match itself was pretty straightforward at first. Yokozuna used his size to dominate, hitting his usual power moves and working toward getting Undertaker into that casket. But Undertaker kept fighting back, doing his signature moves and refusing to stay down. The scale of interference required to put Undertaker away was unprecedented. Crush showed up, then Bam Bam Bigelow ran in, followed by the Head Shrinkers, Diesel, Jeff Jarrett, and several others. At one point, there were nearly 10 wrestlers in the ring trying to help Yokozuna stuff The Undertaker into a box. It was complete chaos, but it made sense within the story they were telling. If The Undertaker really was supernatural, it would take an army to put him down. This also underscored Yokozuna's status as the company's centerpiece heel. They needed him to anchor storylines that required this level of roster involvement. The supernatural elements that followed, including Undertaker's ascension to the rafters, pushed wrestling into completely new territory. After they finally got Undertaker in the casket and nailed it shut, his voice started coming from inside the box. Then lightning hit the building, the lights went out. When they came back on, there was a video on the big screen showing the Undertaker rising from the casket. Then this fake Undertaker appeared in the rafters and floated up to the ceiling while his music played. This feud elevated both characters, but also leaned heavily on theatrics, creating legendary wrestling moments that fans still debate decades later. Some loved the spectacle and supernatural elements, others complained that wrestling was getting too cartoonish. But everyone agreed that Yokozuna proved he could carry storylines that went way beyond normal wrestling. The Undertaker's character got even more supernatural credibility. Their matches tested Yokozuna's limits as a performer, forcing him to work with completely different psychology than his usual monster heel approach. The Undertaker feud proved Yokozuna could work with anyone and make even the most outlandish storylines believable through his commitment to character work. But soon he would face his most demanding test yet, one that would push him to his absolute limits in a single night. WrestleMania 10 on March 20th, 1994 put Yokozuna in an impossible situation: defend his title twice in one night against two different challengers. This wasn't something WWE had ever done before at their biggest show. Usually champions got one match, won or lost, and that was it. But the company had painted themselves into a corner with their booking decisions. They had two top contenders who both deserved title shots, and they couldn't figure out how to pick just one. So they came up with this crazy idea to have Yokozuna face both guys on the same night. The unique booking meant Yokozuna would first defend against Lex Luger, then later in the evening face Bret Hart, regardless of what happened in the first match. If he lost to Luger, then Hart would challenge the new champion. If he beat Luger, then he'd have to turn around and defend against Hart while tired and banged up. Either way, Yokozuna was getting the short end of the stick. No champion had ever been asked to work twice at WrestleMania before. Think about it from Yokozuna's perspective. He was already carrying around 500 pounds every time he stepped in that ring. Wrestling one match at WrestleMania is exhausting for anyone. The lights are brighter, the crowd is louder, and the pressure is intense. Now imagine doing that twice in one night while everyone in the building wants to see you lose. His first match against Luger was designed to be the easier of the two contests. Luger was the all-American hero, but he wasn't the technical wrestler that Hart was. The strategy seemed to be to get through Luger without taking too much damage, then deal with Hart later. But even that plan had problems because Luger was legitimately strong and could actually hurt Yokozuna if the match went long. The controversial disqualification finish kept his title safe, but made both wrestlers look bad in the process. Yokozuna got himself intentionally disqualified by hitting Luger with Mr. Fuji's salt bucket. It was a cheap finish that protected the champion but frustrated fans who wanted to see a real conclusion. Luger won the match but not the title because championships don't change hands on disqualifications. Nobody looked good coming out of that mess. Yokozuna celebrated like his night was over, thinking he'd figured out a way to keep his championship without really having to beat either challenger. He was jumping around the ring with Mr. Fuji, holding up the title belt, acting like he'd outsmarted everyone. But then Jack Tunney, the WWE president, came out and made the announcement that changed everything. The second title defense was still happening as planned. His exhausted state going into the Hart match showed immediately when the bell rang for the second contest. Yokozuna had already wrestled one match, dealt with all the stress and pressure, and thought he was done for the night. Now he had to dig deep and find energy he didn't have. Hart looked fresh and ready to go. Yokozuna looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Bret Hart's strategy of targeting Yokozuna's legs made perfect sense given the circumstances. Hart knew the champion was already tired from the first match. He knew those legs were carrying 500 pounds around for hours already. So Hart went right after them, using drop kicks and submission holds to chop the big man down. Every time Yokozuna tried to use his power, Hart would go back to working the legs. The legwork paid off when Hart managed to get Yokozuna off his feet and apply the sharpshooter. With fresh legs, Yokozuna might have powered out or reached the ropes. But after wrestling twice in one night, he didn't have the strength left to escape. When Hart locked in that submission hold, Yokozuna had no choice but to tap out. The dramatic finish where Hart finally captured the WWE Championship ended Yokozuna's historic 280-day reign. This double booking decision put him at a disadvantage that helped Hart win, but it also showed something important about his character. Despite losing the title, Yokozuna's willingness to work twice in one night proved his professionalism and dedication to the business. He could have refused, demanded the booking be changed, or found some way out of the situation. Instead, he did what the company asked and gave his best effort in both matches. Working twice in one night highlighted his professionalism, but also exposed the physical limits of carrying such weight at the top of the card. His championship days were over, but the real challenges he was facing went far beyond what happened inside that ring. Behind all the championship glory, Yokozuna was fighting a battle that no amount of wrestling skill could win. While fans were watching him dominate opponents and hold championships, something much more serious was happening behind the scenes. His weight was becoming a major problem that went way beyond just looking big for his character. This wasn't about maintaining kayfabe or staying in character anymore. This was about his health and his life. Let's address the elephant in the room, his steadily increasing weight throughout his WWE career. When Yokozuna first showed up in 1992, he was already a big guy at around 500 pounds. That's massive by any standard, but he was still mobile and athletic. He could do drop kicks, climb the turnbuckles, and move around that ring better than most wrestlers half his size. But as the months and years went by, that number kept climbing higher and higher. As his success grew, so did his size, and it was becoming impossible to ignore the health implications. Success in wrestling often comes with a lifestyle that's not great for staying in shape. You're on the road constantly, eating fast food, sleeping in hotels, and dealing with the stress of performing every night. For most wrestlers, this means maybe putting on 10 or 15 pounds over a few years. For someone already carrying 500 pounds, those same lifestyle factors could add 50 or 100 pounds without much trouble. Reports placed him between the mid-500s and as high as roughly 700 pounds later in life. Think about what that means for someone's body. We're talking about adding another full-grown person's worth of weight to a frame that was already carrying more than most people could handle. His knees had to support all that extra weight every time he walked to the ring. His heart had to work harder to pump blood through a much larger body. His lungs had to work harder just to help him breathe normally. This affected his mobility, match quality, and ability to perform his signature moves safely in ways that became obvious to anyone watching. Those athletic drop kicks that made him famous in his early WWE days became rarer and rarer. Climbing to the second rope for the banzai drop became more difficult and dangerous. The move was actually injuring other wrestlers. Jim Cornette suffered a serious neck injury from taking the banzai drop, showing how dangerous Yokozuna's increased weight had become for everyone involved. Even basic wrestling moves like body slams and suplex became harder to execute safely when you're dealing with that much extra weight. You could see the difference in his matches from 1993 to 1995. Early Yokozuna matches had good pacing, athletic spots, and genuine wrestling psychology. Later matches became more about him standing in one spot while opponents worked around him. He couldn't move like he used to, and everyone in the building could tell something was wrong. WWE tried to help with weight loss programs and medical intervention, but nothing seemed to work long-term. The company had a financial interest in keeping their former champion healthy enough to work. They brought in nutritionists, trainers, and doctors to help him get his weight under control. The company even paid for him to attend the Duke University weight loss program in 1996, where he reportedly lost about 100 pounds using diuretics and strict medical supervision. But after leaving the clinic, he returned to his old habits and regained much of the weight. Wrestling schedules don't really allow for the kind of lifestyle changes needed for serious weight loss. His declining health led to his face turn and alliance with Jake Roberts in 1996, as the company tried to find new ways to use him. They couldn't position him as an unstoppable monster heel anymore because he clearly wasn't unstoppable. His mobility issues were too obvious. So they turned him into a good guy, paired him with Roberts, and hoped that fans would get behind him despite his physical limitations. The face turn didn't really work because Yokozuna's character was built around being an intimidating monster. When fans could see that he was struggling just to get around the ring, the intimidation factor disappeared completely. He was still a big guy, but he wasn't the athletic monster that had dominated WWE programming just a few years earlier. WWE limited his schedule for health reasons and tried to reposition him with different partners, including a tag team with Owen Hart, to protect both him and his opponents. He was used less frequently after late 1996, with his last WWE house show appearance coming in November 1996. Despite the company's efforts to help him, WWE officially released him in May 1998, when it became clear his condition wasn't improving. The tragic reality was that his greatest asset was also his greatest weakness. The same size that made him a monster heel was slowly destroying his body and shortening his career. Time was running out faster than anyone wanted to admit. Rodney's wrestling career ended tragically on October 23, 2000, when he died from pulmonary edema in Liverpool at just 34 years old. Despite his health struggles, his legacy as one of wrestling's most effective super heavyweights lives on. His accomplishments speak for themselves. Two-time WWE Champion, Royal Rumble 1993 winner, two-time WWE Tag Team Champion with Owen Hart in 1995, and posthumous WWE Hall of Fame induction in 2012, where his cousins the Usos participated in the ceremony. Behind the monster character was a gentle giant, respected by everyone in the locker room. He wasn't just another big man who relied on his size. He was an athlete who could work at a pace that most heavyweights couldn't match. His complicated legacy represents an effective main event era monster, a respected locker room presence, and a cautionary example of how extreme size can cut careers short. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.